Yo, what is going on, everybody? My name is Dominic from the channel Dominic Talks Movies, and today I'm going to be ranking every single Star Wars film from the worst to the best, so let's get right into it. Hello everyone, my name is Dominic and I love to talk about movies. If you love movies as well, you're definitely going to love my channel, so definitely consider hitting that subscribe button because I post around 3 times per week movie content like reviews, rankings just like this one, occasional trailer reactions and all that sort of stuff. So if you love that, definitely are going to like my channel. But today I'm going to be ranking all 11 Star Wars films, including the 11 episodic films and the 2 Star Wars story movies. And as basically every Star Wars ranking is, this is going to be a controversial list, so you most likely will disagree with a lot of my picks. If you do, definitely let me know what your ranking is in the comment section because I'd love to hear what you think of this amazing franchise. And yeah, without further ado, let's get right into my ranking. Solo: A Star Wars Story is not necessarily a bad Star Wars movie per se, but it is honestly the most forgettable and probably the most unnecessary film in the entire franchise. Now, I love the character of Han Solo, but I do think that Han Solo is almost completely just like Han Solo is Harrison Ford. Although the guy that did play Han Solo in this movie did probably as good of a job as you could do in imitating Harrison Ford and kind of how he would be as a youngster, but overall I really just didn't care for this film. It's not even close to a bad movie, definitely not a bad film, but it is just a little boring and it is kind of just rehashing the same arc that he had in A New Hope. So it's a pretty unnecessary film that I would honestly probably consider a cash grab by Disney. But yeah, overall, this is a film that's very forgettable, a decent enough time, but not one that I'd be looking to rewatch. So the bottom of my ranking are the 2 Star Wars story films, and that is not really a coincidence. They're just not films that I really care about. This one specifically is a little more fun. It has some really awesome parts, specifically the Darth Vader scene in the 3rd act, or just the 3rd act as a whole is pretty friggin' awesome. There's some great action sequences and all that sort of stuff in the mix, some great visuals and all that sort of stuff. But I will say that Star Wars is a franchise that is pretty reliant on having great characters. That's what made the original trilogy so amazing. And this film maybe has the most forgettable characters in the franchise. I'd say the only reason Solo doesn't have more forgettable characters is because it has Han Solo. But in this film, there was like a couple guys that I kind of remember for one specific thing, but I don't remember their names. I don't remember anything about them. They're all very forgettable characters that I was not emotionally invested to. And since this was a film that took place in between 2 movies that we already had chronologically, you kind of already knew what was going to happen, so it honestly kind of barred you from really getting emotionally invested into these characters' lives. But I will say that although it has the weakest characters of the entire franchise, the 3rd act is phenomenal. The war sequence is just absolutely incredible. But that's basically the only redeeming quality about this film, in my opinion. Now, you've probably heard plenty of slander about The Rise of Skywalker, and you will kind of hear some, but unlike a lot of people, I don't hate this movie. I don't hate any Star Wars movies. I don't want to say that I'm a true Star Wars fan, because saying that someone who doesn't like some Star Wars movies isn't a true fan, but I do like all of the Star Wars films to an extent. The Rise of Skywalker is just a fun time that has some pretty great visuals, some great action, and although the character stuff is not really it kind of rehashes old stuff, brings back Palpatine and whatnot, I was not a fan of that stuff. But when you kind of just look at it as a Star Wars film to just have fun with, and not necessarily as a continuation of other films, I think it is a good time. It is definitely a fun movie to watch. If you say you were bored during this movie, you're probably lying, because there's not really much time to breathe. There's always something happening, which can be seen as a negative. They did stuff this film a little too much because of what happened in The Last Jedi, but it honestly is fun, and there's always something going on, so you're invested the entire time. And while I don't hate this movie as much as other people, I think it is one of the weaker Star Wars films in general, but you know, it's not poorly made or anything, so I can't give it too much hate. It's just the least memorable and least rewatchable episodic Star Wars film, in my opinion. So Star Wars Episode 1, The Phantom Menace, is one that a lot of people would consider their least favorite Star Wars movie because, you know, it's boring, it has some pretty poor characters, but overall I can have a pretty fun time with the film, and I think what it provides is definitely very good to the franchise, although it is probably the one that provides the least out of the prequel trilogy, which is why I have it in the last place of the prequel trilogy, at least. To be honest, I have a pretty good time with this film, right? It's pretty boring at times, sure, but it definitely has its moments. You know, it's got some pod racing, which is pretty awesome. It's got some cool world building, which, although a lot of people hate the politics aspect of this film, I actually don't mind it. I think it's decently entertaining. It has some cool world building and all that sort of stuff. And then Duel of the Fates is potentially the most important scene in all of Star Wars history. If you don't know what I'm talking about, then definitely watch on Disney Plus. There's a show called Disney Gallery The Mandalorian, and one of the episodes Dave Filoni talks about the importance of Duel of the Fates. If you haven't seen that, I'm pretty sure it's on YouTube. Definitely check that out if you don't know how important the Duel of the Fates scene is. As on top of that, it's probably still got some great music from John Williams. The score is very well, it fits pretty well. And overall, I just have a decent enough time with this one. I just prefer the other ones a little bit more. So Attack of the Clones is another one that a lot of people hate on, and I guess it makes sense. It's not necessarily one of the greatest films of all time. You know, it's pretty poorly made, unfortunately, for me to admit that. But I do have a decent time with this one. The first two acts are... the first act is pretty entertaining. It has some cool stuff, like the stuff that's going on right now on my monitor. That kind of chase scene and all that sort of stuff is entertaining. It has some really good stuff. The second act, however, is what drags a ton. It's very boring. Almost nothing happens. You know, it's like a snooze fest for the entire second act, basically. But the third act comes around, and then you got some pretty awesome action stuff with Obi-Wan fighting Jango Fett, and then you got the Battle of Geonosis, which is pretty dang awesome. You got some great action in there. You got, you know, Yoda coming in for the first time. You get to see him fight with a lightsaber, and, you know, Obi-Wan and Anakin fighting Count Dooku. It's all really entertaining and good stuff in the third act. But honestly, the second act drags it down a ton because there's nothing going on. It's super boring. So the first act is pretty fun. The third act is amazing, but the second act really is not good. And overall, that brings the film down quite a good bit. But overall, I have a decent enough time with this one, and it provides a lot to the lore of Star Wars, which I really enjoy because I'm a Star Wars fan. So all in all, I do enjoy this film a decent bit. So The Force Awakens is definitely a great film. This is where they start getting really, really good. The Force Awakens is one of the most entertaining Star Wars films to watch. You know, it has some negative sides to it. I do think Rey is kind of a Mary Sue, so if you don't think she is, that's fair, I guess, but I do think she is a little bit of a Mary Sue in this film. However, that stuff doesn't really bother me because it's still a fun Star Wars movie. There's not 1 second in this movie where I was bored. It was like all the time there was something going on to progress the plot, to progress the characters. The plot was interesting. There is always something going on. The visuals are just amazing. Not necessarily the cinematography per se, but the actual like visual effects and all that stuff. The dog fights between all the different ships is really, really good. It looks amazing. You got everything. Kylo Ren is a cool villain. I don't necessarily like that they included old characters from the original trilogy, but I don't hate it. And the new characters are likable enough. As a lot of people say, they underutilized Finn a ton in this trilogy as a whole. I 100% agree with that, but the new characters aren't terrible, and I think they're fun and enjoyable enough to go alongside. And overall, this is just a really fun, action-packed Star Wars movie that it's just pure Star Wars fun. How could you not enjoy this movie? So The Last Jedi at this point is an extremely divisive Star Wars film. A lot of people really like it, a lot of people really hate it, and I'm not necessarily on either side, but I would say I'm more so on the like side of it. At first, I really did not like this movie. I didn't like the direction they took with it, but going back on it, I think going into this film as a film critic, I had a different viewpoint. You know, I like what they did with Luke now because, you know, all of his younger life was, the original trilogy was going from him failing, like him being a kind of farm boy, whiny farm boy, up into being one of the, if not the most powerful Jedi of all time. So it's his success story. But then the sequel trilogy is him going from being a old tortured man who just failed Ben Solo, aka someone who has Skywalker blood. He's a tortured man because he created this Sith Lord, and he feels like horribly about it, and he doesn't want to train Rey. So I like what they did with that. I'd say this is easily the best looking Star Wars film in terms of visual effects and cinematography, which is stunning in this, courtesy of Rian Johnson. You know, the direction, there's definitely some really weak parts in the mix. You know, Rose as a character I really dislike. Canto Bight, I think I don't hate it as much as some people, but they did spend a little bit too much time there. You know, that storyline could have been cut down a little bit shorter. But overall, as an entire film, I think I do like most of it. You know, there is some unnecessary stuff, but I think the good slightly outweighs the bad, and it makes for a really fun, enjoyable Star Wars experience that is very different from what the rest of the franchise has to offer. Revenge of the Sith is easily the best of the prequel trilogy in my opinion, and it is one of the better Star Wars films of all time. This film doesn't waste 1 second getting right into the action, as it starts off in a epic space battle where you're tagging along with Obi-Wan and Anakin, and also the whole first act is also very entertaining. This entire movie, the entire way through, is entertaining. There's always something going on. It has actually some emotion compared to the other prequel films in the trilogy, and it's honestly very, very good. You think there is some occasional bad writing, as with most of the prequels, but I would say overall it is better written than the first two, and Hayden Christensen actually gives a pretty great performance as a young tortured man, Anakin Skywalker. Anakin's turn does not get any easier to watch every time. It is probably the darkest Star Wars movie, and honestly I love it for that. There's some amazing action, which probably has the best lightsaber duel of all time, being Obi-Wan versus Anakin on Mustafar. Overall, this one has some of the best action, some of the best emotion, and all mixed into one. This makes overall one of the greatest Star Wars films of all time, and some incredibly memorable moments. If you saw my Star Wars original trilogy ranked video, You probably will have seen this coming. Return of the Jedi is my least favorite of the Star Wars original trilogy, and here's why. I think that it has some amazing elements, right? It has potentially the best ending in any Star Wars movie and potentially the best beginning in any Star Wars movie, but the thing in the middle, bringing it all together, is one of the weakest, definitely the weakest in the original trilogy. So there is some amazing bits, but then there's the weaker bit in the middle compared to Empire Strikes Back and A New Hope, which are amazing all the way through in my opinion. Also, something I didn't particularly like about this film is that Han Solo, who is one of my favorite characters in the original trilogy and of all time, was kind of turned into a comic relief for this film, and I really didn't like that because Han Solo is one of the most badass characters that kind of brings the whole thing together, and then he was kind of used, he was just a throwaway in this film, and I didn't like that about him. You know, they kind of underutilized Harrison Ford, but this film also probably has the greatest space battle in Star Wars history, maybe, in my opinion. There's so much good about this film, and I know this is kind of boring and the basic thing to say, but I think that the reason this is last place of the original trilogy and third place on my ranking is just because I simply don't like it as much as the other two. A New Hope is a phenomenal film. I constantly debate whether I prefer this or The Empire Strikes Back. I honestly still am debating this as I'm recording this video, but as of now, A New Hope is my number 2 spot. I think the only reason is because this one slightly drags in the first act, just the tiniest of bits. But overall, I think this is a phenomenal film. I would easily give this 5 out of 5 stars in a heartbeat. It is the introduction of Darth Vader, who is probably my favorite movie villain of all time. It is the introduction of all these amazing characters that we've come to grow with and love, and it's just so amazing. You got some great world building, you know, it's just absolutely phenomenal. Luke was a tiny bit whiny in this film, but I kind of understand it for his character arc. Obi-Wan Kenobi was played by the great Alec Guinness, who I think gives a great performance. You know, you got Carrie Fisher, Han Solo, everything about this movie is just so amazing, but I just don't think it is as amazing as my number 1 spot. However, I think this film has the greatest banter and dialogue between our main characters when they're in the Death Star, and I just think it's phenomenal. It's an absolutely incredible film, and I would honestly rewatch this entire trilogy whenever, because they all three are just incredible films, and A New Hope is so phenomenal, but it is not quite on the level of my number 1 spot. So my number 1 is The Empire Strikes Back. At this point, it is the boring and very basic pick, but I honestly can't see myself picking any other film except this one as my number 1. The Empire Strikes Back, in my opinion, is one of the best films of all time, period. It is the best Star Wars film. It has some amazing visuals that still hold up pretty well today, some phenomenal acting, by far the best of the entire franchise. It's just such an incredible film that, in my opinion, is a masterpiece. No Star Wars film can top this one. It is so amazing. All of these actors are in their primes. You got 2 different storylines going on. You know, you're separated from Han and Leia, and then Luke and Yoda. You know, you got some great stuff with that. You got the Battle of Hoth, which is absolutely incredible. You just got some amazing action sequences everywhere, some amazing dialogue and banter. While not as amazing as A New Hope, it is still phenomenal. This is the film that focuses on Darth Vader the most, which I love because he's one of my favorite characters of all time, period. And it's just so amazing. It has some of the most iconic lines of all time. Maybe the single most iconic line of all time being the "I am your father," and just overall it is such an enjoyable film that is also incredibly well made, and in my opinion is just a masterpiece of filmmaking in general. So yeah, although it's basic, I am not ashamed to say that The Empire Strikes Back is my #1 spot. And that is gonna do it for this video, guys. If you enjoyed, definitely make sure to leave a like on the video, subscribe to my channel, and turn on that notification bell so you are the first person to know every single time I upload a brand new video just like this. If you agreed with any of my picks, let me know in the comment section, but also comment below what your ranking is, because I'd love to hear what all the different rankings we have are. I know I probably have a different list from you, so try not to leave any hate comments or dislikes on the video, but if you do, I understand. Star Wars is a very passionate fan base, so we all have our own opinions. However, I wanted to announce that if you're watching this video and you'd be interested in watching my Martin Scorsese ranking, that should be coming within the next week, so definitely stay tuned for that video. But for this video, that is basically it, so I will see you guys in the next one.